Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And, as of a few days ago, I hit a milestone of 15,000 subscribers. I don't hit big subscriber milestones like this very often. This channel's been growing at pretty much the exact same slow, linear rate for its entire existence, and I've never been making content built to go viral over here, so I will take these celebrations whenever they come. Thank you so much. I felt like this milestone was a big enough deal to be worth doing something special, so I posted an open announcement video for a Q&A the other day. I haven't done a proper Q&A since 2017 when I hit 3,000 subscribers, and a lot has changed, both in terms of this channel and in terms of my life in general. I figured it'd be fun and interesting to do that again. And in the day and a half that I kept the announcement public, you guys sent me a ton of questions, and I'm going to be answering a whole bunch of them. Now, I will obviously not be answering every single one of the questions that were sent in to me. I've only included about half of the ones I got in this video. There were lots of commenters who sent in multiple questions at once, and I might only be answering a couple of them as well. There's been plenty of questions that I didn't really feel like I had an interesting answer for, or didn't even really have an answer at all. Maybe 2 or 3 that wanted me to touch on some personal life stuff that I didn't really want to get into. A lot of questions that were kind of duplicates of each other or touched on more or less the same territory. But only focusing on like half of these questions is still going to result in a ridiculously long video, which I thought might be bordering on 2 hours after I compiled them together, and I had to cut this off somewhere. I mean, there was even some questions that I might have found interesting to touch on, but just didn't think I could make room for. So, sorry if I didn't get to your question, but I think that'll be enough prelude, so how about we just get into it? What originally led you to create the Wonky Angle in the first place, and who are your main musical reviewer influences? Okay, so I've always been really passionate about electronic music, specifically since I first got into Orbital when I was like 12 years old or something like that. I'd already been spending years looking into more and more electronic music because I found it so fascinating and completely unlike any of the music my parents were into. When I was finishing up high school, I'd really gotten into Todd in the Shadows and Rap Critic. Always found them consistently entertaining and still do to this day. And Rap Critic, focusing his content specifically on rap out of what he perceived to be a lack of discussion on hip-hop music on the internet at the time, did set off a tiny spark in my head that I could theoretically do something similar for the music I cared most about. Even though I also thought the specific format these guys focused on wouldn't really make sense for the kind of music I liked, being all instrumental and stuff. But what really set off the spark for me to get started was discovering Spectrum Pulse around later 2014, as well as Anthony Fantano shortly after that. Those guys' format, while much more straightforward than Todd and Rap Critic, was just as engaging to watch, and they actually were equipped to talk about the kind of music I liked. At that point, Mark had covered Aphex Twin, Flying Lotus, Tiesto, Skrillex. Fantano had covered pretty much all of those, as well as Fortet and Deadmau5 and Boards of Canada, and even a bunch of artists I'd never heard of before at that point, like One-O-Trix Point Never and John Hopkins. He used to be a lot better at keeping up with the new stuff in the electronic world back then compared to the 5-6 projects he covers within the genre in a given year nowadays. Oh, and I think I discovered John from ARTV a little after them too, since he was okay with covering EDM artists back then. I can't deny he was an inspiration on me back then as well, and especially when I started doing top 10 tracks videos for specific artists, and later worst to best rankings, my approach to those was pretty much directly copied off of his format. But as much as I got into these critics, and as excited as I was to hear them talk about the kind of music I cared about, all of them made it clear that electronic music was not typically their thing. They covered it anyway to make sure their taste stayed as versatile as they could, but it clearly wasn't where their actual passion lied like it was for me. And it was at this point that I thought, okay, I want to make videos exactly like Mark and Fantano and John, but I want to specifically focus on electronic music because I hadn't seen anyone else who really cared about that genre to the level that I did. This is a niche that I didn't think anyone was filling, and I wanted to fill. Technically, I wasn't the first to make a channel specifically focused on electronic music reviews. Landon Remixes had been around for a couple of months before I started, but I hadn't come across his stuff until maybe like early 2016 after I'd already been at it for a little bit. And even if we didn't see eye to eye at first, when, for instance, I covered Flume's Skin and he was like, "What? You didn't like this?" The fact fact that we were both channels who focused on electronic music eventually just automatically led to our having common ground, and eventually making videos together on 4 separate occasions, including my video recounting the entire 2010s decade, which I still look back on very fondly. Maybe we'll collab again sometime. I haven't come across a project that felt like it'd make for a good enough opportunity for it, but he has said he's still open to the idea, and I probably would be as well. And of course, that's not to get into all the other critics and music-related content creators who've inspired me and influenced me after I got started. Oliver from Deep Cuts, Dead End Hip Hop and Mike Seatown, Not Real Music, Buffalo Staple, David Rowe, Mike the Snare, Rick the Lie, Liam the Music Reviewer, Crash Thompson, Adam Neely, Notes Reviews, Rough Criminal. If you want to count some creators who aren't really putting content out on YouTube anymore, but were still a noticeable influence on me, I also need to shout out The Double Agent, Ethan Beck, Here Lies Music, The Sound Binge. Is he still going? I don't know. Mark Berman, aka Fully Involved. The latter's more on TikTok these days, but I still regularly connect with him on Twitter. Oh, and while I'm on the topic of fellow music-related YouTubers, are you at all friends with Brad Taste in Music? I've heard him shout you out before in his videos, and I've seen you comment on some of them. Well, I'm not gonna say I know Brad on like a personal level or anything, but I was a fairly early supporter of his channel before he really started to blow up, I think. I discovered him in early 2018 after someone tagged me on Twitter in like a March Madness bracket they made for YouTube music reviewers they liked. And this was also how I discovered a bunch of these creators I just mentioned above. Like, they'd all formed this little community with each other and all had such wildly different approaches to talking about music that were all equally entertaining to watch. Ryan with his down-to-earth unscripted approach and seemingly endless well of recommendations you've not heard before from all genres. David Rowe with his really articulate delivery and infectious enthusiasm. Buffalo Staple and Rick the Lie's off-the-wall editing and goofy senses of humor balanced out with lots of insightful commentary. Liam the Music Reviewer and Mike the Snare's more professional and well-edited but still frequently hilarious and snappy formats. And of course among that camp, maybe not quite as closely connected as the others were with each other, but I got into at the exact same time, was Brad Taste, who had the most entertaining and well-made music reaction videos I'd ever seen before up to that point. I think the first proper full video I saw from him was his reaction to 21 Pilots' Blurry Face. And even though I personally enjoy that album a fair bit more than he does, it was so freaking hilarious seeing him just relentlessly tear into it.
The contradiction because of how happy it sounds, but the lyrics are so down.
And back then he did so much high-effort editing, which, while I can see why that might not have been consistently sustainable for him, made everything he did back then that much more fun to watch. Always got the feeling he might have had a slight bit of a YTP background, not unlike myself. His content nowadays replaced that flashier editing style with a lot more audience participation through his live streams and that kind of thing, but other than that, he's got pretty much the exact same appeal that he used to. I make sure to continue to interact with his channel every now and then, and I'm more than happy that he still shouts me out for it sometimes. What is your overall stance on noise music? Not that it's your thing or anything, but I'm just curious about your opinion of its impact on music and how far you've delved into it. Yeah, noise music continues to not be my thing and a pretty major blind spot in my bank of music knowledge, purely for sensory reasons. Music that aims to be really loud and extreme or has a lot of clipping audio in it is always going to be an inherent turnoff, no matter how hard I try to fight against it. Same reason I've never cared for most metal music. And noise music can often incorporate a lot more like screechy high frequency stuff, which will be an instant no from me. But I do at least feel like I understand the appeal of it and can't say there's nothing in the genre to appreciate at all. Even if you ditch all sensibilities of melody and structure altogether, there can often still be appeal in like the particular textures you explore. Artists like Oneohtrix Point Never and Patricia Taxon stuck in their own explorations of noise music within otherwise much more normal-sounding albums. Neil Admirari on Returnal and Birdsong on Pix and Bit, respectively. Both cuts still fit really well within the context of their albums and allowed me to realize this genre might still be able to appeal to me in spite of my sensory issues with it. And Patricia Taxon even once recommended a Merzbow album that I actually ended up decently enjoying in Hybrid Noise Bloom. There's a bit of like a psychedelic krautrocky appeal to that project, and in spite of how intense it all is and its near complete lack of tune or overarching structure, It remains decently engaging through all the different strange experimental textures flying past you and maintaining a slow but steady sense of progression. It's still not at all the kind of thing that left me wanting to seek out more. The album could drag for me. I got tapped out by the halfway mark and needed a break, and there was still a lot of high-frequency abuse, especially in that freaking 20-minute track that I could not mess with, and that prevented me from being able to say that I'd ever want to come back to it, but I did still come out at the end of the album feeling more positive than I would have expected and thinking, that was actually pretty cool. I mean, if artists are going to incorporate these kinds of elements, I'm always going to prefer those who keep the noise in moderation, like Tim Hecker, for instance, or at least attach them to some otherwise more accessible ambient-type compositions, like Paint Scratcher's Life and Death. But even if I don't think this genre is ever going to fully be my thing, I feel like I've at least given it enough of a chance to know that it has its place, and I can respect it for what it is. I mean, no genre as broad as noise can be treated as a monolith to be written off entirely anyway. What keeps you driven to keep making videos after all this time since starting? When it comes to this channel in particular, there's a few different factors that I think have especially contributed to its continued longevity. For one thing, these videos are not nearly as much of a time sink as they might look. Sure, it looks like a lot if you're looking at it in like the macro and seeing the dozens of videos I upload over the course of a given year, but the turnover for any given video is typically pretty damn quick. Some of the simpler ones, like individual videos in a discography review, can be knocked out in a day or two, and even a lot of the longer ones, like Some Stuff I Missed roundups, or this Q&A video, might only take a week and a half to put together. As much time as I spend on this channel, it never gets to a point where it's all-consuming, or I don't have plenty of time for other things that have nothing to do with the channel. For the past several years, I've balanced this channel with a regular day job and gotten along fine with both. And still just managed to find time for other projects such as the YTP channel to keep some variety in my life, even if not focusing there as much as I used to. But even if this channel never requires an unreasonable amount of time or effort out of me, I still always come out fulfilled with the work that I do. It's still a consistent outlet I have to express my passion for music, and it never feels like work. And I never really get too bothered with the analytics either. I care just enough to make sure the channel isn't stagnating, but like I said in the intro of this video, I know well that my content isn't built to go viral or appeal to an especially wide audience. And there's really something nice to know that I do have this audience anyway. That there's a fairly large group of people who are willing to click on any video I might upload and maybe find out about some music they hadn't heard of before, or just want to hear me talk about stuff. Even if my audience never grew to the level that it has, I feel like I'd still be doing this the same way I always have, just because I personally find these videos rewarding to make. Have there ever been times you've wanted to stop doing reviews? Nope. Never once gotten sick of it after all these years. Honestly, I could see myself still doing this when I'm in my 60s or something. At least assuming YouTube is still around at that point. I might be a bit in trouble if the entire site goes away. Or assuming humanity itself is still around at that point. But if we're still around by the time I've gotten to that age, people are still making electronic music, and there still exists a platform for me to be able to make this kind of content, I'll probably still be doing this. The world of electronic music itself is going to be completely fundamentally different 40 years from now. I hope I get to see where it goes. Do you ever get exhausted by how much music there is in the world? Also no. That's actually another reason why I feel like I could comfortably continue this channel into my old age if possible. Even if no more new music released ever again, I feel like I still have a lifetime of electronic music that I could be hearing from the past 50 years. And that's still just limiting myself to the mostly electronic-only format I've already established. The idea of running out of new music to check out honestly seems like way more of a scary proposition to me, and the fact that I feel like I'll never run out of new music to check out as long as I live is honestly something I find a lot more of inherent comfort in. What was your favorite album of all time before Orbital's Insides? Honestly, I don't think I had a favorite album of all time before Orbital's Insides. At least I wasn't thinking of what would take that spot before I made the decision sometime in high school that, okay, this album is like completely flawless, it's gotta be my number one favorite of all time. There were other albums that dominated my life before I made that decision, including other albums I'd still score a 10 out of 10, like 808 States Down Solaris, and one non-electronic album I'll talk about later in this video. And before that, Orbital's Blue Album and Air's Moon Safari dominated my entire life for a span of time, circa 2007. Or you could go even further back before my discovery of Orbital to when I was a literal child and say something like The Beatles 1 or Rubber Soul or the Have a Nice Decade compilation of 70s one-hit wonders and that kind of thing. But I was never, like, thinking about any kind of actual rankings back then. The first time I'd actually thought about the idea of what my favorite album of all time would be and felt like I could give a concrete answer, it was Insides. And even now, it's still probably not as concrete as I might be making it out to be. It's just the default answer I'd give. The other 10s are still very close. Best and worst Daft Punk song. Best is Face to Face, worst is Rock and Roll. But on that topic, you have a gun pointed at your head and you have to listen to either Ventolin by Aphex Twin or Rock and Roll by Daft Punk. Which one are you picking? Rock and roll, without any hesitation. I mentioned during my little discussion of noise music how abusing high-frequency noise is an inherent turnoff that can absolutely drive me up the wall and ruin my listening experience. This is why Ventolin is much harder for me to get through. Rock and roll may be longer, but its worst crime is just being really boring and undercooked. Ventolin feels way longer than it really is, thanks to that fucking tinnitus ringing, on top of the similar lack of progression over time. Ventolin probably has more actual fans and defenders, but in terms of which one I'd personally choose to listen to, there's no contest here. Would still prefer not to listen to either, though. Do you see yourself doing a top 10 songs list for a more recent artist such as Vale Smith or Patricia Taxon, or is that reserved for artists you consider worthy for a discography review? Okay, so in the macro for this question, I don't have a rule set in stone against top 10 lists for artists that I don't feel would be worthy for a full-on discography review, and I'm not against the idea in theory. But I do definitely focus on those artists for good reason. When I've just finished a discography review, I have that artist's whole catalog fresh in my mind, and it's a lot easier to organize and put together. Also, when an artist is eligible for a proper series, that also means I know for sure that they have a lot of different specific tracks to pick from and could probably make for an interesting top 10 list. And chances are the inverse will be true too. If I can do a top 10 list for an artist, I can do a discography review. And don't know if I have an example of an artist that wouldn't fit that criteria off the top of my head. But I also don't feel like the two examples you've given fit what I'm talking about. Whether Vale Smith is eligible for a discography review is beside the point, since I've technically already done it. I've already done video reviews of all his studio albums so far, and he'll get a proper official playlist for them when he releases his next album in March, and I inevitably cover it. Also, at the current moment, I don't feel like he quite fits in the top 10 format yet, because his catalog feels a bit too limited, and I would want more to pick from. It'd be a little chorus skate heavy at the moment. Patricia Taxon, on the other hand, has a discography review playlist, because even if I haven't done proper videos on all her albums, anytime I cover one of her new albums, I always talk about the ones I missed in between in the prelude of a given video. So maybe not technically a full discography review, but she kinda has one in spirit. And she also doesn't really fit into the top 10 tracks format, but instead for the reason that I don't tend to think about her from an individual track perspective, and don't think she designs her tracks to be taken out of context from her albums in that way. Such a video feels like I would be doing it wrong to some extent. Also, given how much she's released, that would be a lot of work. Do you like gabber music? I don't think so, though I'm probably not as well educated on the genre as I could be. Whenever I think of gabber, I also think of the EDM genre it eventually evolved into, hardstyle, and the crappy productions that came out of people using those ugly-ass overblown kicks. And the small bits of gabber I've heard just kind of take those similar ugly kicks applied to faster tempos and happier Eurodancey leads and that kind of stuff, I guess. Technically easier to respect for, being an older style and all, but not more fun to listen to by my ears. Granted, I've never actually looked into the genre more in depth beyond small clips from people who are making wider genre guides or running into it on accident when artists known for their work in other genres tried to tap into it. Maybe my perception of the genre is off, and I'm sure if I actually looked for the quality in the genre I could find it, but I haven't bothered, so I don't know. Given that you did worst to best rankings on Yes and Pink Floyd, when do you think you'll do one for the Moody Blues? I think I'm going to try to tackle them sometime this year. I've been kind of teasing that I'd be interested in doing that one, and I even have an empty Google Doc for the script that just has the album titles in the order that I think they're going to end up, based on what I remember from first going through their stuff years ago. But I haven't actually started writing anything or re-listening to any of the albums yet. I'm gonna try for some time this year. We'll see. Will there be a genre guide? As in, will I be making a guide to navigating electronic music genres in my channel? I wouldn't hold your breath for that one. That is an unbelievably huge ask. This is a subject that people take extremely seriously and requires so much detail to go into. You could write a freaking doctoral thesis on it. All the interconnected webs of house and techno and trance and breakbeat and bass music and ambient music, they're completely separate histories that sometimes intersect with each other and sometimes don't, and all their gazillion subgenres that also occasionally cross over into each other. This is frankly way too complicated a subject for me to be able to boil down into one simple video and requires so much work and research. There exist genre guides out there on the internet and maybe some books that might be able to serve you well, but I'm better suited to analyzing these kinds of things from like a more specific case-by-case basis in my reviews, and even with all the years of experience I have in this field, I still have a hard time getting my genres straight in a lot of cases, and tend to just prefer to not be that big a stickler about it. Don't get me wrong, I love the insane amount of variety the electronic music world has to offer, and it's yet another reason why, subject matter-wise, I feel like there's no limit to how long I could keep this channel going. But providing a map of how the entire genre is laid out, that's one heck of an intimidating project to tackle, and I don't think I'll have time for that. Sorry. Who's the best, worst EDM producer in your opinion? Honestly, gotta be David Guetta. His music is consistently awful. He's probably made like 10 good songs over his entire 20-plus year career. But sometimes the pure shamelessness and sheer on-the-nose lack of effort can end up providing the entertainment value in and of itself. Artists like Calvin Harris and Tiesto may have more genuinely good material under their belts, but that can also make the crappy stuff sting that much more, and artists like Marshmello and the Chainsmokers may have even fewer high points than Guetta, and have been pretty easy punching bags for me in the past, but none of those artists are the fun kind of terrible like Guetta is. If Marshmello or the Chainsmokers put out something, I'm like, fuck you, I'm moving on with that. But if Guetta comes out with a new album, I will actually be looking forward to covering it, because I know if absolutely nothing else, I'm going to get a good video out of it. Shout out to his family. How many albums do you have on your iPod? At the current moment, I have 1,434 albums on my iPod here, which also equates to 14,504 songs and 50.2 days worth of music on my iPod. And I have to go through that list to trim it down semi-regularly to make sure that I don't run out of the 148 gigabytes of space on this thing. Man, screw Apple for discontinuing the iPod Classic. This thing served me so consistently well, and I can't imagine my life without it. Hello, here's my question. Do you make music? I do make my own music, and it's been playing in the background throughout this entire video. It's all released under the name 256pi. You can find me on Bandcamp at 256pi.bandcamp.com. You can also look me up on Spotify or Apple Music if you like, since I'm there too. I just kind of make general electronic music that ends up touching all sorts of different genres, anything from ambient to techno to breakbeat to house to even a little disco or prog influence stuff, or anything in between. Mostly built out of samples with occasional software synths following my own original compositions. I will admit the overwhelming majority of the samples I've used come from royalty-free sources, and that has been a turnoff for some people. But I do put in a ton of work to make them sound like my own thing as much as I can, get them to all blend well together and remain consistently entertaining and cohesively structured, and I'm personally all around happy with the work I've put out. I've been doing this since the late 2000s, but if you're looking for a good starting point, I'd most recommend my last album, Noontideside Attic Drifter. Also, a handful of people have asked me some other questions about my music, so I'll get into those here too. Are you working on or planning to work on any new music, and if so, what should we know about it? At the moment, I'm just kind of sketching out some ideas for what I want my next album to be like and how it's structured. I feel like this next one is probably going to be more ambient-centric. I'm openly moving away from some of the more vocal-centric and more conceptual vocal sample-centric approaches of my last two albums, respectively, and maybe more towards an atmospheric style, kind of like my Inside the Mainframe album. I also know that unlike that album, I want the next one to be on the shorter side. Maybe not as short as 04, but I'm going to be aiming to not break an hour. I haven't properly started work on the music itself yet, but I do have a working album cover which may serve as an initial point of inspiration as I eventually start building some sessions for the 256pi music channel to start from. None of this is set in stone and it might not reflect on the final product, but that's kind of the direction I hope to go in at least. Have you ever dabbled with a synth before, or a modular synth? I have not. Analog synths tend to be quite expensive, and I wouldn't know where to start in that department. I'll probably have to try it sometime eventually, though I also feel like I'd want to deepen my skills with the software ones I already use first, so I don't know. Is there any possibility of another 256Pi physical release? I think once my next album is done, I think I'm going to have to try to have that one released alongside a physical version. As for older albums, I guess I don't really have any specific plans for any at the moment, though the Marble Jar CD run did quite well, so I probably could do it. I guess we'll see. No specific promises of anything, but we'll see. As a musical artist yourself, do you have any advice you can share regarding making music? I think the number one advice I would have to give is don't be afraid to release bad music. You will never be making the world worse by putting out bad art, and it's good to just get in the rhythm of releasing stuff so that you don't get eternally caught in a loop of perfectionism and never get the chance to share your personal expressions with people at all. If it ends up not being good, that's fine. It'll still always be a learning experience you can build from and improve upon next time. Also, if you've already released music, please for the love of God don't take it down just because you think it's bad or beneath you. At the very least, archive it somewhere if need be. There's a release on my Bandcamp page called One Tint, which compiles together a bunch of the music I made on GarageBand when I was a literal preteen child, discovering music making software for the first time. It's god-awful and embarrassingly basic. Has maybe 2 tracks I think are worth anything by my current standards, but it does really highlight how far I've come and really puts the work I've made as an adult into perspective. Also, what does or doesn't count as bad art will always be in the eye of the beholder, and if someone comes across your thing and finds it to be special, even if you don't, you shouldn't take that away from them. Also, please watch CJ the X's excellent video called 7 Deadly Art Sins, which goes into this topic a lot more detail. What's been your experience sharing your love of electronic music with other people outside of the channel? I've always found it to be a bit of an awkward niche where it's difficult to find people in the real world who are either existing fans or open-minded to exploring the genre, but this could just be my experience as a Gen Zer. Oh, you're definitely not alone on that one. That is a struggle I have had for my entire life. I distinctly remember being in 7th grade, circa 2009, really furthering my love of artists like Metamatics and 808 State, who I'd recently discovered on my own time, and I was being put into a conversation with my classmates about the kind of music we all liked. Some of my classmates liked rock, some of them preferred hip-hop. What about you, Tommy? What do you like? Oh, I'm really into electronic music. Oh, you mean like that beep boop beep stuff that's made by machines? That was their actual answer, and it got a lot worse in my early high school years, right after Skrillex broke out, and everyone thought all electronic music was dubstep for a while. As a kid, I got so used to getting weird looks when I told people my favorite band was Orbital, this 90s techno duo from the UK that nobody I met in real life had ever heard of, and people's bemused reactions to my obscure musical taste may or may not have fostered a little bit of insecurity as well. It's the reason why I hate listening to music I like on speakers and eternally prefer headphones, not wanting to bother the 3 or 4 people I share a house with, none of which share any of my music tastes and have very little interest in the weird stuff I like. You know, weird stuff like Orbital, that noted band who never saw any kind of greater success at any point in time and have no elements to their sound that might make them accessible to some kind of wider audience. There's a reason this channel is called The Wonky Angle, outside of mashing Orbital and Hybrid album titles together, because I know that perspective that I've always come at the music world to be highly unconventional to most people. And that's also why the internet is great. It makes finding people who share my enthusiasm in this kind of music so much easier when I know I wouldn't be able to find nearly the same kind of enthusiasm from people I know in real life. When I started this channel, I certainly never would have imagined I'd amass an audience of 15,000 people who clicked on the button to say, oh, I'm interested in hearing this guy talking about this weird electronic music stuff and want to hear more from him. So, thank you once again to every single one of you. Are you autistic? I say this without any intention of harm. I'm autistic too and feel I come off in a similar way. I've never been officially diagnosed with it. But, yeah, I am almost certainly autistic. At least I'd be very surprised if I'm not. I was officially diagnosed with ADHD when I was a kid. That's had a lot more of an obvious and unignorable presence in my life, and I've related to pretty much every symptom that's ever been described for people who have the inattentive type of ADHD that I do. Even made an entire album about it once. But that also didn't explain 100% of the weird behaviors and tendencies I've always had. I didn't think I was autistic for a while because I have other friends who were also on the spectrum and had much more severe cases than my own. But having both autism and ADHD at the same time is the only thing that would explain all of the weirder behaviors that I have and how they can compound on each other or even cancel each other out in some ways. How they really heighten some of my social anxieties and sensitivities. I don't know if I can fully explain all of it, but long story short, yes, I'm 100% confident in my neurodivergence all the way down over here. Do you have a girlfriend? Nope, never have, never will, don't need one. I'm asexual, aromantic, really don't have any interest in that kind of thing, and feel like I could live a perfectly happy and fulfilling life if I never even have to think about getting some kind of romantic partner. Even would find that preferable, honestly. It's just never been how my brain is wired. Do you have a definitive #1 album when it comes to non-electronic music? Also directly related, are there any non-electronic albums that you would give a 10 out of 10? I can answer both of these questions with the same album, and it's this. It's Andreas Vollenweider's Down to the Moon. This is definitively a 10 out of 10 in the same tier of life-defining and life-changing quality that the other 4 albums I've already scored a 10 sit within. I may not consider Andreas Vollenweider's music to be electronic in any capacity, and there's maybe 1 or 2 tracks I can think of that he's made that utilize a synthesizer to any extent. But he is one of my all-time favorite artists anyway. And his stuff has just so much incredible instrumental density and emotional depth, ostensibly labeled as new age, but dips its toes into jazz and classical and world music and rock music and more. Such a giant inspiration on me, and so underrated too. I never see anyone talking about him, probably because all his best work came out in the 80s and he always had an extremely niche audience, but I could genuinely see myself doing a proper full-on discography review for him, with scores and everything, just for how much his music has meant to me in my life. I mean, at the end of the day, my format being exclusively for electronic music is more of a device for me to, stick to the kinds of artists that I either wouldn't feel out of my depth trying to talk about or don't already get widely covered by all my other music reviewing colleagues. It's not the kind of thing that I set to, draw specific boundaries on what does or doesn't qualify under a genre label, which can often be blurry. Vollenweider may not be electronic, but I feel like he would still fit well in my format. I'll get to him someday. I don't know when, though. As for other non-electronic albums that I might consider to be worthy of a 10, I'm honestly not sure. Lots of my all-time favorites outside of electronic music, like Yes is the Yes album, Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, Steely Dan's Countdown to Ecstasy, they're in the 9 range. The latter I once thought about whether it was a 10. I don't think it is, though. The Moody Blues Days of Future Past feels like it might be in closer contention for it, but it still feels like a step away from the 10s I already have. In any case, I think you'll find if I were to expand my favorites of all time list to all genres and not just electronic, there wouldn't be more than maybe 10 new entrants into the list. It would still be overwhelmingly electronic-centric. I've heard you say before that you don't typically prefer albums that are sad, somber, or depressing. Are there any exceptions to that? What's an album you love that may not necessarily be very happy or uplifting? Okay, first of all, when did I ever say that? I know I've run into albums which were depressing to an extent that actively cut into my enjoyment. First example that comes to mind is Depeche Mode Spirit, for instance. Though, when it comes to albums like these, there's usually a different problem I have with them that prevents me from wanting to come back to it. In the case of that one, it was that it felt openly defeatist. Like it ended on a track that basically said, oh, the world is fucked and nothing can be done about it. Which, while that was understandable to be feeling in 2017, it's really not a sentiment I could jive with beyond that. Thank God that's not going to be their last album and they just announced a new one which seems like a direct tribute to Andy Fletcher. It already sounds way better. But to say I don't typically prefer albums that are sad or depressing couldn't be further from the truth. There's tons of depressing music I love. I recently just did a worst to best ranking for the band Air and gave major props to albums theirs like Pocket Symphony and 10,000 Hertz Legend. Those albums are not at all what I would call feel-good listens, and they're some of my favorites of all time. I've done a worst to best ranking for Pink Floyd, expressing my love for their stuff. They are pretty much the kings of feel-bad music. I also love me some Burial's Untrue, some Biosphere Senja recordings, other Depeche Mode albums like Music for the Masses, anything by the Black Dog post-2005, Hybrids Disappear Here and Black Halo, Rum Pistol's last two albums, including Isola, which I just marked as my number 2 favorite album of 2022, that Ryuichi Sakamoto album I just reviewed, literally anything by Moby, Radiohead, Cabaret Voltaire, Meat Beat Manifesto, Coma Duster, or Tim Hecker. Hell, my favorite album of all time, Orbital's Insides, gets pretty damn dark and depressing in a lot of moments, like The Box and Dwar Booter and Petrol. And of course, someone also replied to this comment with Boards of Canada's GeoGaddy, if you want another really on-the-nose obvious pick. I have absolutely nothing against dark and depressing music. Dark and depressing music is great. But while I'm on the topic of Boards of Canada, have your opinions on Boards of Canada changed much over the years, like certain albums or songs being better or worse than they were since your discography review, etc.? Not really, though Tomorrow's Harvest has grown on me a little more. I still stand by my feelings that it's easily the least memorable of their albums, and there's a number of tracks that I tend to forget exist entirely. But there are definitely tracks that I've come to remember more easily, like White Cyclosa or Jacquard Causeway, or especially tracks like New Seeds and Nothing Is Real that eventually found more of a place in my life. And the whole album is nice as this even more desolate exploration of their sound than usual. While I don't think it quite reaches greatness, I would probably score that album maybe 1/4 point higher if I covered it now. It's at least equally on par with Campfire Head Phase. And side note, there's always been a part of me who's gone back and forth on whether or not I should redo that Tomorrow's Harvest review, because I've always found that video to be one of my most embarrassing and cringeworthy ones, thanks to this one little quick aside near the beginning where I invent some elitist asshole commenter in my head that might try to counteract my points by saying, oh, if I'm looking for pop melodies in a Boards of Canada album, then I must be a gay F-slur and should off myself. Except I said the slur out loud. I've never gotten actual blowback for that video. Nobody's tried to cancel me for that moment because I was clearly presenting someone who might say that word as a reductive asshole who ought to be immediately discredited, which you are if you say that slur. The video never even got demonetized until I just turned it off manually to be safe. But that aside so obviously didn't need to be there, kinda like the dubstep rant in my first Burial video, and knowing it's been there continues to not fully sit right with me. The commenter I had invented in my head would have been bringing up a perfectly valid point, and it really made no sense to be openly ridiculing that counter-argument in the way I did. It's one of the most glaring examples of how pissy and insecure my writing would often get in that era around 2016 and 2017, and how my overcorrecting for expecting the worst out of my commenters would actively make my videos worse. The only thing is, also like that Burial video, if I were to redo that video, I feel like I'd have pretty much all the exact same things to say about it, because my opinion hasn't fundamentally changed enough to contradict any of the points I was already making, and literally the only reason for me to redo the video now would be to hide that one 3-second moment that didn't appear to actually offend anyone to begin with. At least not that I saw. Chances are I'm probably just going to leave it and continue to leave with the embarrassment, and as long as people know that I found that embarrassing, they'll let me know what you guys think, I don't know. Do you have any other hobbies that are unrelated to music, or do most things you do involve music in one way or another? Also a bit more of a random one, but do you think Boards of Canada will ever release another album? Well, to the latter question, it's weird that I got 2 people asking me that, but that isn't really my business. I'd love for them to release new music, but if they're not in a place to, then that's fine, and they're probably also quite comfortable making tons of money from the music they've already released. If they want to stay out of the spotlight as they've always done, that's their impetus to do so. You can also copy-paste these thoughts to this other guy's question about why I think Daft Punk broke up. If they want to be left alone, then leave them alone. Now, as for the question about my non-music related interest, yeah, there's plenty of other things that I do in my spare time. I do occasionally make time for watching some anime or playing some video games, mostly old Nintendo games I grew up from the DS and Wii era. And those two interests also quite heavily converge into my work with my little brother Johnny. He has his own YouTube channel called Kempfdog for big, huge Ace Attorney analysis videos, which I edit and co-write. As of now, there's only 3 videos on his channel, a 2-part video ranking all of the Ace Attorney cases, not including Great Ace Attorney, and a list for the top 10 worst Ace Attorney characters. But these videos go ridiculously in-depth and take a really long time for us to put together. The latter took over a year, and the former took nearly 3 years to make, mostly thanks to my own busy schedule with this channel and both of our day jobs. On top of that, while we're talking about larger-scale YouTube projects, there's also my YTP channel, 256Pi Alternate, which itself, while mostly on the back burner these days, still has a markedly bigger and more dedicated audience than this channel. You might know it for me having made the Michael Rosen version of the steamed hams meme, or the ongoing plotline of Michael Rosen's story-based YTPs called the Rosen Family Chronicles, which have been going on for almost a full 10 years now. It'll be 10 years as of this coming March. I know a lot of you already know about that. There's some decent overlap between my YTP audience and the audience for my reviews, but these two channels also have completely separate fan bases, and I imagine there's a number of you who might be coming across this video and didn't realize that these two channels are entirely run by the same person. It's always kind of funny when people figure that out. Oh, and a few people even came into this Q&A to ask me some questions specifically about my YTP channel, so how about I get into those as well? What inspired you to create the Rosen Family Chronicles series? So, I got my start in Michael Rosen YTPs thanks to one of my cousins. We'd really gotten into Thomas the Tank Engine YTPs circa 2010. Mostly those by Keeper of Beans. And one of those videos had like a random section that chopped up the Michael Rosen rap, which both of us found hilarious. And eventually we came across the whole ongoing scene of Michael Rosen YTPs, made by people like Katana Soul, and Captain Plums, and Mecha 91, and Alarm Copter, and Chicken Pika, and plenty of others. And the two of us kind of worked together to make what eventually became my first Rosen YTP. After that, I kept at the whole Rosen thing on my own by joining the 67th birthday collab. And I made a video called Michael Rosen vs. the Lollipop Lady as my own entry that kind of had a loose story to it, and like some big epic music behind it. I figured it could get me some more attention, and it did sort of insert me into that community. And I just kept trying to make more and more, and I started to chroma key out the background behind Michael's videos and animate him, and the stories got more elaborate and more coherent. And also there may have been another alternate account of mine I made around the same time called Root-16, which blew up completely separately, though oh my god, is that a whole different can of worms that I kind of don't really want to get into here. But yeah, the animated story YTPs I made started to get really popular around 2014 when I uploaded the video Rio Rosen, which was markedly more elaborate than most of the other stuff out at the time. The plotline kept escalating further and further. I got attention from pretty much all the other Rosen YTPers who inspired me to start in the first place. I even got a comment from Michael Rosen himself via Twitter, several months ago, calling my work extraordinary, which he never freaking does for anyone. I still can't believe that actually happened. And that's just kept me going all the way up to present day when I uploaded an 18-minute YTP called The Return to Rio this past Christmas, which took me 2 entire years to put together. I'll admit that channel hasn't really been my main focus in a long time. Mostly because of this review channel, which is way easier to pump out content for and doesn't actually require even as close to as much of my spare time. Also, I can actually make money on reviews and can't do that for YTPs because copyright and stuff. And now that I've been finding a comparable-sized audience doing reviews, it's pretty much entirely overtaken the YTPs and become more of my main thing as of the past couple of years. But the YTPs haven't been completely abandoned yet. They are still fun to make every now and then, and they still get way more attention than anything I do over here, so yeah. What keeps you into making Rosen YTPs? If I have to be brutally honest, right now the only thing keeping me going with Rosen YTPs in particular is pretty much just the lingering want to finish what I started with the overarching TRFC plotline. And that's kind of it. While I still enjoy making YTPs on a baseline level, especially can still get some joy out of making YTPs with like old school Zelda CD-i, that's still fun. And has the extra bonus of my own childhood nostalgia that Rosen doesn't have as much. But while Michael Rosen as a YTP source was always way more versatile and got me way more attention, it doesn't give me the same, like, seemingly endless inspiration it once did. I mean, sure, you can sentence mix them to say literally anything in existence, but after 10 years of doing this stuff, it really doesn't feel like there's anything new that can be done with them. I don't really go out of my way to watch Rosen YTPs that much anymore these days. I couldn't even bring myself to watch the last 2 birthday collabs in full despite participating in them. In my defense, those collabs are several hours long and were always more than a little exhausting to watch even when my channel was still in its prime. They require a level of commitment to that community to sit through at all that I don't quite have to the same extent anymore. Most of the YTPers that I was close friends with back in the day have moved on with their life and gone on to other things as well. And while there is still an active Rosen community, they're all different people who are all way younger than me and grew up watching my old videos when they were little kids. And even some of those kids who started all these years after me felt like they got to the point of retiring, which is so weird to think about. Man, am I old. But directly related to this answer, do you think the next episode of the Rosen Family Chronicles will be the last episode? Yes, it will be, though it is also worth noting that said last episode will be split up into multiple parts to make sure that I don't go another 2 years without uploading anything substantial there. I don't know when the first part's coming, I haven't actually started on it yet, but I'm going to be working on that and releasing them in like isolated parts which might come out every handful of months or something. And then when I get to that last one, I'll compile them all together into one video to be counted as the official final episode. And then after that, I'll be doing the Season 4 Remastered compilation, adding up all the episodes of the plotline that aren't covered in the other 3 season comps I've already made. At that point, I think I'm going to be officially done with Rosen, and we'll probably just shift 256 Pi alternate to maybe CD-i videos, or if I do Rosen videos, they're going to be a lot lower stakes. But again, that's going to be a ways away. As you might be able to tell, again, that channel really is not the #1 priority in my life right now, so things will just come as they will at this point. Thoughts on YTP Tennis, seeing as how you're a YTPer? YTP Tennis is fun. For those of you who don't know, that's pretty much when one person makes a YTP and then goes back and forth taking turns with another person, continuing to edit that same YTP and add more jokes and effects, whatnot, every time. I've never participated in one myself. I almost got into one between like the Root -16 channel and another YTPer who isn't active anymore, and that just fizzled out and didn't go anywhere after one video. But they are always fun to watch and a nice little exercise. There's some pretty legendary ones between like Fish Titan 64 and One Super Chops that I remember loving. They did one that was centered around Anthony Fantano that I don't think is up anymore, probably thanks to some jokes that haven't aged well, but yeah, they're fun. Hate to be that guy, but have you seen any YTPs that have your reviewing show as a source? I don't actively seek them out, but I know several of them exist. I've seen a couple that I thought were funny. There was one that I think Pathui made right around the time this channel was first getting started that was funny, if a little intentionally distasteful in points, as his sense of humor tends to be. I know I was included as like a one-off villain character in a YTP by NDM, YTP, and Might Eyes that one time too, which really caught me off guard when I first saw that, but that was a really damn good video too. And there's other examples that I have vague memories of, but again, I just don't really go out of my way to watch for them. Top 10 Zelda CD-i cutscenes. Okay, I'm gonna use this to cap off the YTP section of the Q&A, but this looked like it'd be a fun little diversion for me. Number 10 is the Wanda Gamelon intro with 1 month later and my ship sails in the morning and dinner. Number 9 is meeting Ganon in the Faces of Evil.
Die!
Number 8 is an underrated one. This stars are made of ice monologue from Faces of Evil. Low-key the single most bonkers line of dialogue in either game, which should be really saying something. Number 7 is After You Cut the Chains on Mayor Cavendish, which has these 2 freeze frames, no commentary necessary. Number 6 might be lower than you'd expect for me, given how frequently I've referenced it over the years on my YTP channel, but it's when everyone's been taken to Taikogi Tower, Cavendish marks on this being illegal, you know, and the baker's cakes will burn! One of the all-time greats, but the competition is just that stiff. Number 5 is not having enough rupees to pay Morshu, which pretty much only has one notable soundbite, but is the single most iconic soundbite of them all. Number 4 is You Killed Me! Good! Number 3 is the Wand of Gamelon outro, which has "You saved me, here's the traitor, Majesty, have mercy, scrub all the floors in Hyrule." He was a bore anyway. All the classics. Number 2 is More Shoes, Lamp Oil, Rope, and Bombs, because of course. And number 1 is the Faces of Evil intro, which has not just Boring Around Here and My Boy and Strive For, but also Squadala, What Are All Those Heads, The Map, How Can We Help? There's no individual line in that intro that did not go on to become a classic meme. Even some lines played in reverse are memes, like how Warriors backwards is cereal, and how My Boy backwards is hell no. An endless gold mine lasting just 58 seconds. Anyway, we were talking about music and reviews before, weren't we? Let's get back to that. Is there an artist discography you want to tackle but don't know where to start? Well, there have been a couple of suggestions that people sent into this Q&A that might fit what you're talking about, like Deep Chord, aka Rod Modell, or Ryoji Ikeda. I know the latter released an album recently. No promises of anything, but I might have to check that out. Also, this person mentioned Actress. Haven't heard any of his stuff yet, though I think I can cover him next time he releases another album. Granted, if I don't know where to start for a given artist, it typically just means I haven't done any research on them yet. Once I actually look into them for a little bit, I'll typically figure out how to best tackle them relatively quickly. The hardest ones aren't always the big catalogs necessarily. It's often more the ones that spread their work out over a lot of different alias and side projects, like Luke Vibert or Mark Pritchard or Gerald Donald. Rod Modell's another example of that, funnily enough, because he has his work under his own name, but also his work with Deep Chord and Echo Space, and that's not as easy to organize. But hey, if I figure something out and get a good opportunity thanks to a new major release from said artist, a video is likely to follow. How do you find or keep up with new music? I have several different means of keeping up with new music. On Bandcamp, I like just keeping up with daily articles in their new and notable section. I often find a lot of neat stuff to fill up my Some Stuff I Miss roundups there. When it comes to new releases from artists I already like, there's either following them on Bandcamp to get notified when they post something to the site. There's the traditional means of following artists on Twitter. Or I can also just check Discogs. There's a section on the home dashboard page which lists out all the new releases from artists who I already own a physical copy of something they've put out. I also frequently check the front pages of the dance and electronic sections of the iTunes store. I've come across cool stuff in their new music sections. For instance, that was how I discovered Pasarani last year, and he ended up with my number 4 album of 2022. And there's a pre-order section letting me know about releases which may be on the horizon. Both of those still get regularly updated and keep me up to date. I suppose there's technically also iTunes charts of what's selling well in a given genre, though that's really not useful for discovering new music. It's kind of just a wasteland of the same releases all the time, with some occasional bots thrown in for good measure. Though I do occasionally keep tabs with the charts just in case. And of course there's the reviewers I follow who might turn me on to new things, and there's just you commenters who might send in suggestions for things too. I got lots of means for keeping up with new music. How did the Wonky slush thing start? I don't know. Some guy's just been posting that exact same 2-word comment on almost every new video I upload for the past 2 years, alongside some other guy who always either posts that he's here before the other guy, or replies to the other guy saying wocky angle. I don't know what wonky slush or wocky angle mean, and frankly, if there was ever any meaning behind them, I don't actually want to know what it is. But as far as I'm concerned, it's completely meaningless. And I've just kind of rolled with it because they don't spam me, and all of it technically boosts me in the algorithm a little bit. Obviously not saying I want more people to do what they do, but I'm not fundamentally bothered by them. When are you banning or muting or doing something about that wocky angle weirdo from your comment section? I just hope your comment section never turns into something like Fantano's one. Are people genuinely bothered by those guys? I mean, if people are, I guess I could do something about it, but I never really saw any harm in what they were doing, and I don't think their continued presence is putting my comment sections in danger of turning into Fantanos. Again, right now, it's just 2 guys. They don't post in an overly spammy way, just 1 post per video, a reply to each other, or a reply to someone else trying to address them, and that's it. If there were loads of commenters doing the same thing over and over to the point of completely burying the actual on-topic conversations, like what goes on in Fantano's comments, that'd be one thing. And if they were, like, actively harassing people or sending me a specific video request over and over or trying to insult me, that would be another thing. But I never got the impression that's what they were doing. Heck, one of those guys has left actual on-topic comments before. I did once almost get a third guy who tried to post another 2-word comments on all my videos, but he also tried to go back through my old videos and ended up sending me a gazillion notifications in the process. That was way more spammy and actively made it more difficult for me to get to everyone else's comments, so I deleted everything he sent me and he stopped. Again, I am not encouraging more people to mindlessly post the same meaningless things over and over. I also very much prefer when my commenters stay on topic, and the overwhelming majority of my comment sections are. Most of you leave actual, perfectly respectable and on-topic comments, and that's preferable. I'd like it to stay that way. I'm just also not in the habit of banning commenters purely for either going off topic or not having anything to add to the conversation. You could be doing a lot worse. Do you have any favorite artists in Japan? Artists other than electronic music are also welcome. Well, I did just finish doing a video on Ryuichi Sakamoto and YMO, if you want a really obvious pick. I've also been a big fan of Kenny Shi for quite a while now. His whole catalog is rock solid. I could see myself doing a proper series on him someday. I liked what I heard from 99 Letters. That guy made an album that just ended up on my 2022 year-end list. I could also probably give a shout to Yoshinori Sunahara, since he made this one ambient techno track called The Center of Gravity that I discovered through an iTunes Essentials playlist when I was in high school, and I ended up really liking, even though I have yet to look into any of his stuff outside of that one track. Apparently that guy's also a member of the band Denki Groove, and someone requested one of their albums for my upcoming Patreon schedule, so I'll be checking that out a while from now, because it's pretty later on the schedule. I'm not going to say I know much of any Japanese artists outside of electronic music. I guess there's Yoko Kanno. She did the soundtrack to Cowboy Bebop, and that's obviously brilliant. I can shout her out, but that's what's coming to mind, at least. Favorite Basement Jaxx album? I've always been partial to Crazy It's Radio, personally. Jaxx albums may always be full of bops, but I always liked how they tried to go the extra mile with that one and make the whole project tell a loose story of two people getting together and breaking up, while also adhering to a loose, fake radio station concept. It's the only time they made that extra effort to actively tie all the tracks together. Never really got why it seemed to get less favorable reviews. I think it's their best one, yeah. Which artist has most disappointed you since you first heard something of theirs you loved? Possibly BT when he put out Metaversal. I mean, I don't think I've ever been more viscerally upset while recording a video than that one. I was so pissed that one of my all-time favorite artists was seemingly setting aside his passion for music in favor of passion for crypto and NFTs, and making an entire album openly glorifying them. I had been defending him so hard for so many things over the years, but there was just no excuse for that shit. Though while we're directly on that topic, in your older Q&A, I asked you why BT was your favorite solo artist. Has your opinion changed since his whole NFT stuff, or other reasons like you found someone else, or has nothing changed all too much? Okay, I have a lot of complicated feelings here that I'm gonna have to vent here, but TLDR, while I don't think I can definitively say that BT is my favorite solo artist anymore, I also don't think I can definitively say he isn't. In one breath, over the past couple of years, I've had to stop myself from letting artists releasing NFTs from ruining my enjoyment of them, because at the end of the day, within this scene, there's just been way too many of them. Just to name a few: Aphex Twin, Deadmau5, Pendulum, Arca, Amon Tobin, Max Cooper, Triphonic, Fatboy Slim, Traffic, Disclosure, Carl Cox, Sven Vaith, Ryuichi Sakamoto, Lee Scratch Perry right before his passing, Jean-Michel Jarre, even freaking Orbital just tried to jump on the bandwagon super late a few days ago. It seemingly never seems to end, and if I stopped supporting or mentioning any artists who put out NFTs, then I lose access to a third of the artists I enjoy talking about, and all the ones that get me the most views. By the way, side note, shout out to Zircon. He was the one artist in this space who I actively saw rallying against crypto and NFTs and ridiculing them and bringing direct attention to all the big problems with getting involved in them. Also shout out to Brian Eno as well, who mentioned them being artistically pointless in one interview. Really wish more artists had taken their perspectives. They're right. But anyway, since for most artists this was only ever a side thing, they were just kind of jumping on the bandwagon for a one-off thing that you could theoretically ignore and continue to support them without having to dirty your own hands, that's just kind of what I've ended up doing. BT may have hurt the most because not only is his music so important to me, but he was doing it out of genuine passion for that technology and for the community of crypto bros he was an active part of. And between his getting some actual mileage out of it, thanks to having jumped on the bandwagon a couple of years before it really took off, and his enthusiasm obviously reaching the point where he threw together that one entire album, programmed directly on a blockchain, I knew he was going to be in that sphere for good, even if the market crashed. But as much as all of this has been beyond infuriating to watch, I haven't actually given up on him yet. First of all, none of the crypto antics actually impacted my enjoyment of his albums. Anytime I put on one of his other projects, I still enjoy them pretty much exactly as much as I did before. Movement and Still Life took a slight hit thanks to it being the beginning of his most commercial and capitalist tendencies. And Between Here and You actually grew on me a little because that was very clearly not an album designed to do numbers or in any way or pass itself off as anything higher stakes than it was. He just made some ambient music because he felt like making some ambient music. But that's the thing. Even all the way up through present day, it's so obvious that he cares so much about the artistic side of things and the actual craft of music making above all else. And that passion does show in all his work. He's still willing to put out some really uncommercial stuff like This Binary Universe and all the related albums. And even on his most commercial stuff, you can tell that it's always a labor of love and never purely a means for him to make more money. Metaversal sucked, not just because of what it represented, but because it was very obvious that he rushed it to coincide with the crypto market blowing up, and going with that improvisational approach to composition directly went against his primary appeal. But I'm also willing to believe that could be a one-off. I don't think all the insane amount of passion he has for music would just disappear like that forever. And as for my favorite solo artists, I suppose there are others who have had a similarly big impact on my life while being less frustrating to follow, obviously. Square Pusher could be in that conversation. Lee Norris, aka Metamatics, could be in that conversation. It's just that BT hasn't left that conversation yet. He's still up there. The one thing that changed is that I'm just now at a point where I'm not going to be defending him quite as hard as I always did in the past. I still love pretty much all the guy's music, but he is obviously a capitalist, and at this point I'm not going to try to change the mind of people who either never liked him in general or just don't want to support him. That's perfectly understandable. Have you ever considered getting a Discord for your community? No, sorry, I'm not getting the Discord server. I've used the site a couple of times with some of my old YTP friends, and outside of not caring for the whole layout of the site being kind of disorganized and not particularly intuitive, at least for me, I also just have a hard time mentally handling that particular kind of live chat setup in general. I had the same problem with Skype many eons ago when that was a thing. I get the same feeling being on Discord that I do when I go to a family gathering, like there's a bit of awkward pressure of needing to be on and keep up a conversation, even though that doesn't come naturally to me. But it's also combined with the energy draining and stressed out feelings I get when I try to talk to anybody on the phone, thank you autism. And obviously none of that has anything to do with the people on Discord, that's just what any live text chat setup does to me. I can handle it in very short bursts, but it just socially overwhelms me, and the idea of starting up and having to moderate my own server full of strangers who I don't know personally, yeah, sorry, I really don't think I could handle that. Similarly to the last question, have you ever considered getting a RateYourMusic account? Similarly to the last question, not really, though for completely different and less viscerally intrusive reasons. RateYourMusic seems like a perfectly fine site in terms of its actual layout and navigating it and stuff, and I can see how it could be beneficial in terms of discovering new stuff or keeping up more with what's popular within some of the communities that follow me. But my problem with that site, I guess it's more with I guess the vibe I get off of its user base. I've always sensed this kind of toxic elitism off the people who regularly use the site, and this hostility towards people whose music tastes don't match their own. And I'm not even talking about the forums. Some people told me it's markedly worse there, but I wouldn't know. I've mainly just been clicking around the main site itself, and something is just always felt weirdly off and unwelcoming about it in a way that I can't really put my finger on, but could never really get past. The fact that it's also where I've seen the most people go off on how much they dislike my original music probably doesn't help, but that's not exclusive to that site, or plays much into my feelings. Opinions are opinions. But some of y'all have a weird way of expressing them. I think I once came across someone on the site who treated like a 3 out of 10 as meaning they think an album is just alright. I don't get that. Is that part of the whole trend in some discourse of mid equaling bad or something? I don't know. I mean, I only ever saw the one guy treat their scale like that. Most people do it like the traditional Fantana way, which is fine. But in any case, I've seen enough of this kind of like subtly malicious attitude there to rub me the wrong way. While I'm at it, I also don't really like the idea of being limited to the 5-star scale. I know the overwhelming majority of albums I've covered on this channel I'd score somewhere in the 7 out of 10 range, being solidly good, above decent, which is the 6 range, but below greatness, which is the 8 range. And I do feel like I'd need the extra nuance that the quarter points in my scale give me, since even if albums I score a solid 7 or 7.7 are in the same bracket of enjoyment, there does feel like a clear difference between them to me. Maybe a site like Album of the Year might serve me better, with that site's scoring being on a scale out of 100. That'd be more useful. And in my limited interactions with the site, I haven't gotten as much of those mildly toxic vibes off of that site that I do to RateYourMusic, but I haven't used it that much, so I don't actually know. I can see the use for these kinds of sites, I just never really felt the strongest need to join one of them. Are you a fan of Massive Attack and trip hop? And if so, what would be your favorite trip hop albums? I definitely enjoy me some old school trip hop every now and then. I think my favorite album I've heard in that genre would be Tricky's Max and Quay. That album's excellent. Though I'll admit my exposure to classic trip-hop doesn't really go beyond the biggest and most obvious classics, and I never got that much into Massive Attack in particular. I still haven't heard anything they did after Mezzanine, but that album always kinda left me cold anytime I've tried to put it on, only ever thought it was alright and a bit of an unpleasant and bitter downer that didn't really connect with me on an emotional level. I liked Protection and Blue Lines more. Protection was probably my favorite of those three, though Blue Lines has Unfinished Sympathy on it, which is an absolutely incredible track and completely outclasses everything I've ever heard from them personal enjoyment-wise. And while we're talking big obvious trip-hop legends, there's also Portishead. I still have yet to get around to their other two albums, sorry, but I remember thinking Dummy was pretty nice. The kind of thing that when I first heard it in high school, I was like, this is really dry and boring, but I've given it a couple of other shots in subsequent years, and it grew on me a little more each time. And I guess if you count stuff like DJ Shadow or the Cinematic Orchestra as trip-hop, then that's absolutely my shit, as I think I've gone over in the past, though I feel like that's kind of something a little different. I think at the end of the day, I just need to listen to more trip-hop, but what I've heard of the big and most obvious classics, I mostly enjoy. Are you excited for the new Orbital album? Oh boy. Obviously yes, but I'm also kind of worried about this one. I'll get into this stuff more when the album drops and I inevitably review it, but I actually feel like this rollout's been kind of rocky, and I haven't been able to shake this feeling of something being a little off about the whole thing. All the singles so far have been at least good, and Are You Alive is properly great, but also all three singles are very obviously solo Paul Hartnell tracks, and not even trying to hide it. Dirty Rat was great when I first heard it, but got diminishing returns with repeat listens. Ringa Ringa was good and has neither grown or shrunk on me, but felt kinda undercooked by their standards. There's also the fact that I've had to cancel my pre-order and reorder the CD twice because they weren't forthcoming enough with about what versions have what bonus material. I'm currently going with the Amazon exclusive one because that one has 3 entirely original bonus tracks, which I'm assuming will be like the bonus tracks on Monsters Exist. But they've also shown a bit of their lack of social media savviness, like accidentally leaking Are You Alive on YouTube a week early through an unlisted video on a public playlist, seemingly without realizing it. And that's not even to get into the biggest mistake of all when they announced their above-mentioned limited run of fucking NFTs and trying to pass it off as, oh, it's just a digital pressing. Yeah, nice try, guys. I know they're trying it at all as totally like a delayed peer pressure thing, like they'd kept hearing about how great this stuff was from all their friends. They kept their distance for a while until they found the one company that touted its eco-friendliness and seemed less overtly suspicious than most of them. I doubt this is going to become a trend with them, given their usual anti-capitalist tendencies, and I'm willing to let it slide the one time, but I also know these guys are better than that. But with all of these various grievances aside, I am still excited to hear the album anyway. I saw the album credits, and while, like I feared, Paul and Phil did not actually work together on a single track, I am intrigued that 3 entire tracks are Phil's solo efforts without Paul. And there's also the fact that I remember feeling uneasy in the earlier lead up to Monsters Exist as well, before that uneasiness turned out to not be justified at all. None of the singles from there were instant winners, not even The End Is Nigh, and it wasn't until the album dropped and I got to hear how well they were sequenced and worked off each other did they start to properly enter the pantheon of my favorite Orbital tracks ever. There is a good chance this album's singles will hit better in context as well, and obviously at the end of the day, this is still my favorite band of all time we're talking about here. I am going in with measured expectations, and I have a feeling that Optical Delusion will end up as my easy least favorite of their albums. But the lowest I've scored an Orbital album thus far has been an 8.5. The album could still reach proper greatness, be one of my favorite albums of 2023, and still be my easy least favorite from them. If it isn't my least favorite, that automatically means I think it's amazing. So, I guess we'll see how that all goes at the end of this week. I'm wary, but still hopeful. How many estimated CDs do you have in your collection? According to what I have on Tracked on Discogs at the moment, I have 420. Granted, that also counts the 4 vinyl records I have, the limited edition USB for BT's Underscore, and also box sets are being treated as single releases. For instance, I have the whole box set for Underworld Strift Series 1, which is 7 CDs and a Blu-ray, but that only counts for 1. So the real count is probably more like 430 something, but Discogs says I have the haha funny number, so let's go with that. What is a moment in a live show that transcended you profusely? You want one moment? I'll give you 3 moments that transcended me profusely. First of all, there's the first concert I ever saw, which was Paul McCartney live at Wrigley Field in 2009. What a way to start, first of all. And seeing Live and Let Die with all the crazy pyrotechnics will live with me forever, but I think the moment that really transcended me was when he pulled out my favorite McCartney deep cut, 1985 from Band on the Run. Neither I nor my dad were expecting him to play that one at all, and it was absolutely incredible. Second example has to be when I saw Jean-Michel Jarre live in 2017. Guy already had the most next-level light show of any concert I'd ever seen before or since, but the best moment had to be when he played The Time Machine and switched on the giant laser harp. I already knew of that laser harp's existence beforehand, but there is absolutely nothing that can do justice to actually seeing that in person. But I think the moment I saw in a concert that most profusely transcended me was big surprise when I saw Orbital live for the first time at the very end of 2018. Well, there were 2 moments, really. The first one was when they played Impact, and it really clicked in my mind that this is it. This is the real deal. I am really experiencing my favorite band live in person like I've always dreamed of doing so for so many years, and I felt like my entire nervous system was short-circuiting. But I think the bigger moment was near the end of the concert when I thought they'd wrapped up, but in the encore they instead pulled out one of my favorite deep cuts in The End Is Nigh. There is literally nothing like going to a concert for a band you love and then pulling out some random deep cut that may not be popular with everyone but means something very specific to you, and in that moment, I felt like I was personally connecting with my favorite band. The possibility of, maybe them seeing my videos and knowing how much I love that track, while unlikely, was crossing my mind at the time. I think that one moment was probably the single most personally impactful moment of any concert I've seen. Are you ever going to fix that wall? Nah. What is your favorite decade for music? Mine is 2010s, 2000s, 1980s, 1970s, and 1960s. Well, that's bait, listing out every currently relevant decade for popular music except for the 90s. Which is probably what I would answer with. Within electronic music specifically, it felt like the 90s just had such a ridiculously wide-ranged explosion of new innovations in styles and creative ways forward. The rise of stuff like IDM and Detroit techno and house music and jungle and drum and bass and UK garage and trip hop and instrumental hip hop. So many styles and genres we take for granted in the world of electronic music today got their start or at least saw a major rise in the 90s. Hundreds upon hundreds of artists from so many different walks of life pushing forward the genre in so many different ways. And sure, every decade has their big innovators too. The explosion of EDM culture in the 2010s is almost comparable in scale, but when I'm going through like years of electronic music, I feel like I have way more huge favorite choices to pick from throughout the 90s than I do in any other decade. What is your least favorite album of all time? Still Dave Nolan's The Outsider, and it's not close. Now, some people have tried to tell me that I thought I was being too harsh on Dave Nolan's The Outsider in my video of it, and how they think this stuff was just meant to be a troll and bad on purpose based on how I portrayed it, but I have to say, no, I don't think the intent behind The Outsider was to be a troll. I didn't detect any kind of artistic intent behind it at all. I really wish I had saved the album so that people were able to listen to it in full and get more of the picture of what I'd been talking about before it got taken down and I became one of the only people who actually remembered what it felt like to listen to the album. In my video, I only highlighted the funny parts of that album, like how one track looped the exact same reversed fade out over and over, or that 5 different tracks were near identical copies of each other with the same annoying-ass lead synth riff. But the actual album was actually a lot more banal and boring than that. There were more tracks where nothing of interest was going on at all aside from really generic EDM beats played in reverse. If it was trying to be irritating, it could have gone way further than it actually did. No, I firmly believe Dave Nolan was not a troll, it was spam. It was trying to do the bare minimum of what could qualify as music that the automated systems behind distribution services wouldn't automatically flag as suspicious, and make that in the shortest amount of time. Reversing samples of low-rent EDM covers of existing music because it'd get flagged as re-uploading someone else's stuff if it wasn't reversed. Slightly adjusting the volume for each track to prevent it from getting flagged as releasing duplicates of the same thing over and over. Making stock album covers in PowerPoint, and then finally gaming the iTunes system itself to make not just that album, but 4 other functionally identical albums top the iTunes electronic charts. All of this stuff charted and very high at the time. That is a big part of what made me hate that so much. It was so blatant that almost immediately after I posted my video, and thereby gave the album actual attention, it was taken down off of all streaming services, presumably for being some kind of literal scam. And what's also insulting is that, as I slightly hinted at earlier in this video, the iTunes electronic charts still get covered in tons of bot albums like this. Just now they're released by artists called things like Jack Wohu and Liz Osiris and Hortense Gingras. The music they upload isn't as comically unlistenable, so as not to attract human attention. Now it's just really generic stock MIDI lounge music. But it's probably being made for the same purpose, to just spam the iTunes and Apple Music charts and possibly make for some kind of low-rent money laundering scheme. Maybe, I don't know. And they haven't been going away like Dave Nolan did. They keep topping the electronic charts on a regular basis, and I continue to feel more than a little insulted by their existence. Any of you obscure Bandcamp artists out there who might be insecure about how people might think your music is bad, you can take comfort knowing you'll never end up comparable to Dave Nolan. At least you'd be trying to make music. Do you enjoy doing Patreon requests or the reviews of bigger highlighted acts that you've covered in the past more? Bigger highlighted acts I've covered in the past are certainly much easier to make reviews of. I know exactly what I'm talking about in those cases, which makes the process of writing them typically much smoother. They're always a safe bet. Patreon requests are always way more of a mixed bag. They can range from forcing me out of my depth and leading me to do a lot of research on something that ends up not being my thing. But I can also find some legitimate gems within them, like my videos on Pantha Prince and Fila Brasilia. Patreon requests certainly have the ability to take me into new territory that I wouldn't get a better chance to explore without them. I know I often drag my feet on those requests since I do them in the order they're requested and they'll need me to be in the right mood for, but I don't plan on getting rid of them. I think my channel wouldn't be as interesting without them. Is there a chance you would reopen the Patreon tier for discography reviews? I thought that maybe you could have this once a year, that someone could request something that you may even find interesting. I suppose there's a chance. They aren't going to be cheap if I do that, though. I'd at least be charging like $100 for one. Individual videos within discography reviews are easy, but a full series as a whole always gets stretched out over several months, and I tend to only finish 3 or 4 of them within a given year. So even just one of them a year being a paid request would still be a lot. Especially if someone wants to request a really long catalog like Venetian Snares or one of the 70s synth pioneers like Vangelis or something. I might consider it when I get through the discography reviews I already have planned. For those not in the loop, as of recording this, I'm currently working through a series on music. After that, I'll be doing a series on just the earlier career of Tangerine Dream, so just studio albums up through 1986. Then it'll be The Prodigy, and then maybe Amon Tobin after that, but we'll see when I get to that point, I suppose. You mentioned several times that Hybrid is one of your favorite bands ever, but you still haven't made a proper discography review. Is that going to change in the foreseeable future? Well, as I mentioned, they're not currently within my plans for discography reviews, but I know they're gonna have to get a series at some point. Whenever I'm deciding which artists to make a series on, I tend to want to switch up which kinds of artists I talk about each time so that I'm able to service different sections of my audience. As a result, I don't like doing 2 series on 2 similar artists right next to each other. With a band like Hybrid, I guess I haven't found the right sort of jumping off point where I felt like they contrasted enough with what artists came before. That, and I suspect a series on them isn't going to do that well views-wise, so there's a part of me who kind of wants to put them in between some more popular names to avoid people making comments like, man, why do you keep talking about this X band that I've never heard of? Why don't you talk about Y band that most people have never heard of but that I like? But, I also think that there's just that part of me who doesn't want to run out of my all-time favorite bands to cover and then not be able to look forward to the opportunity of covering them in the future. Sounds from the Ground are in a very similar boat as well. I will eventually do discography reviews on both of them. It will happen someday, I just won't be able to tell you when. And speaking of Sounds from the Ground, I'm really into Sounds from the Ground. What artists would you recommend to a fan of their music? Okay, the closest 2 matches that I always bring up and think of in the same category are Magic Sound Fabric and 01. Their styles are very similar to SFTG, and I got into them, all of them, right around the same time. Both underrated as hell. And I've even done a discography review on Magic Sound Fabric if you're interested. There's also Zero Cult. Check out his albums Dreams in Stereo and Where Rivers Have No Name, though that's kind of in a similar boat. And there's also Fela. His stuff comes at a very similar kind of sound, but more from an OG dubstep influenced angle. I think that'll give you plenty to work with. What is your most controversial take on electronic music? I don't know, not liking Flume, not taking electronic genre sticklers all that seriously, Incunabula being my favorite Outer album, Aphex Twin being out of his prime and not having done especially worth hearing since Cyro. There's probably more disagreeable takes I have than that, but I'm not actually the kind of person who, actively enjoys getting into controversy. I'm not one to ever lie about the way I feel or sugarcoat my thoughts if they happen to not be favorable, but I'm not in this review game to, make enemies or dunk on people. I just like talking about music. I remember in the first Q&A you brought up that you've watched a few anime series. Have you watched more since then? If so, which one stuck out to you? Yeah, I've seen a couple in the past. In the past 2 years or so, I caught up with watching Trigun. That show is fantastic. I also watched Outlaw Star. That show is not fantastic. Maybe hasn't aged the best in a few parts, but it was still a generally fun time. And as for more recent shows, I finally caught myself up on most of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I've seen all of it except for Stone Ocean as of now. I'll have to get to that soon. And there's also My Hero Academia, which is my brother's all-time favorite show and current near all-consuming obsession. My brother posts giant analytical essay comments on My Hero Academia theory channels and got a decent following just from those comments. That's the same brother that I make the Ace Attorney videos with, by the way. I don't love the show to nearly the same extent he does, maybe just because, like, superhero stories aren't my thing as much. But he's been forcing me through the series anyway, and I have enjoyed myself through the vast majority of it. I totally get the hype behind that show. It is a very good show. Next up, oh boy, 11 questions in one comment. I'm just gonna answer a couple of these. Do you agree that mango is the best fruit ever? Not really a fruit guy, honestly. Tend not to like the way they feel in my mouth. I can tolerate apples and oranges, but don't really go out of my way for them. I'm more of a raw vegetables guy. Favorite Beatles album? My mind changes on this one every now and then, but right now I'm feeling Rubber Soul. That album is literally the earliest musical memory I have at all from when I was like 4 or 5, and it still all holds up. 13 hits and only one miss right at the end. And that one miss isn't even that bad, it's just John Lennon being an edgelord. Do you struggle with social anxiety? Yes. Fantastic song and an otherwise mediocre album. Okay, first thing that came to mind was some kind of game from Against All Logic 2012-2017. Though, to be fair, that album is not actually mediocre. It's at least decent. There's definitely other good tracks on there. Just nothing that remotely comes close to that one. No, you know what a better example is? Lift Me Up by Moby. The album that track comes from, Hotel, is extremely mediocre and not worth hearing, but I've always loved that one track and considered it one of his best. That album was a good intro cut, too. Favorite meal? Noodles and Company butter noodles with seasoning and grilled chicken. Okay, we are in the home stretch here. Just a few left. Would any albums from your year-end lists for 2015 through 2022 make your top 100 albums of all time at this point? The Avalanche's Wildflower will have definitely made it into my top 20 somewhere. Commodus or Solace would probably end up somewhere in there. Maybe Hudson Lee's Headspaces could just scrape into one of the bottom spots, but I don't know about that one either. I think that's about it, though. When it comes to stuff in this decade, I feel like it's still too soon to say. Albums like Ski Mask's Pool and Rum Pistols' Isola feel like they have a good shot. Others like Rob Clout's 0 Point, Vale Smith's Chorescape, Patricia Taxon's Triada Chabalette are in a bit of a maybe pile as well, but I'd want a few years to actually know for sure that they have the long-term staying power in my life to even be eligible for that list. An album ruling over one particular year in my life doesn't guarantee it'll stick with me. The Chemical Brothers' No Geography may have completely dominated my 2019 to the point where it felt like the only viable option for my number one album of that year, but I also haven't really come back to listen to that album much since 2019 ended. No Geography is still a great album, but it definitely would not make my favorites of all time list. And there's a part of me who wonders whether an album like, for instance, Chorus Gate will end up with a similar fate. We'd have to check back a few years from now. What album do you think would have risen the most for you, as well as fallen the most for you on your favorites of all time list? The one that rose the most for me is unquestionably Robert Miles' Dreamland. That album took on a whole different meaning after he passed away, and what originally took up a spot pretty low on the list would now almost certainly be somewhere in my top 20. I feel like J Dilla's Donuts would have a similarly high spot, even though I hadn't heard that one yet back when I first made the list in 2016. As for albums that fell, the one that most readily comes to mind is BT's Movement and Still Life Again. Even if I do still think that album is great, I was already having second thoughts about its placement not even a year or so after I made it, and nowadays you could easily replace it with ESCM. And maybe something like Metamatic's Dope for the Robot is a bit of a filler pick that I could have replaced with something from another artist who didn't get as much representation. Though if his abundance of appearances on that list made more people want to check out Metamatics, then it was still worth it. If I were doing that list nowadays, I definitely could have limited myself to no more than 2 albums per artist and cut out a whole bunch of those repeat names for the sake of including a greater variety. But I'm still kind of glad I threw caution to the wind with it anyway, just for the sake of being honest to my listening habits. And I still agree strongly enough with my picks to still be recommending that list for people getting into my channel for the first time, even though I recorded it in 2016 and I come off awkward as hell. I regret nothing! Where do you see electronic music in 10 years? What stylistic evolutions do you imagine are on the way? Well, obviously you never really know with that kind of thing. All I know is that this genre is going to look different then. But at the same time, there's also a chance that it's not. Obviously not a high chance, because so much changes in the world over 10 years, but so far I haven't really gotten the feeling like there's been a lot of, big new innovations within electronic music in the 2020s so far. Most of the big releases I've heard in this decade were like trying to reach back to some of the older innovations of the 90s, and I feel like the last new electronic scene that like really made a big splash was hyperpop. And while that genre is still going strong, I feel like it peaked before the pandemic hit. It's no longer the future of music like people were calling it at the time. As of right now, the 2020s for electronic music is kind of shaping up to be similar to the 2000s. There weren't a lot of huge innovations in that decade either, at least not compared to the 90s. You had the rise of Daft Punk and French House. I guess you had commercial downtempo like Röyksopp. You had the beginnings of OG dubstep in the latter half of the decade, and I suppose there was also the club boom of 2009, paving way for the EDM revolution throughout the 2010s. But a lot of the 2000s electronic scene was kind of just continuing off what the 90s started. So maybe the next big thing might still be a ways off, but I guess we'll just see how wrong I turn out to be soon enough. T-shirt collection! T-shirt collection? T-shirt collection, you got it. Okay, this pile right next to me is all the t-shirts that I have in my drawer over there that I wear semi-regularly. That doesn't include a couple that I guess are kind of more out of commission at this point. But I have two over here that I have out of commission. I don't wear anymore, but I never got rid of. Like this EDM one, which I don't wear anymore because it's got some paint stains at the bottom. I don't know if those are visible. But I wore that one when our family was in the middle of like painting our kitchen. So I don't wear that one anymore. And there's also this one, John from ARTV's logo. And I don't wear this one anymore because it has holes in it. There they are. They're right all the way along the armpits. Now as for the t-shirts I wear and keep around, let's see here. So here's some, starting with some of the older ones that I wear that maybe have kind of seen better days but are still in a wearable condition. Like this hybrid one. I got this one from during the Light of the Fearless album cycle. It used to say "We Are Fearless" on the back, and now there's nothing left of that on the back, which maybe that's a metaphor for something. We got this one of Kraftwerk's Autobahn. That one's cool. I got this Pink Floyd one. That one, you can still tell what it is, even though a lot of that is wearing off too. Next we got this one. This is a Moody Blues t-shirt. Technically Moody Blues, I guess. It says Moody Blues on it, though this is not an album cover of theirs. I don't know what it's a reference to. My dad got it for me for a Christmas present. He just searched Moody Blues and that was the first thing that came up. I don't know what it's a reference to, though. This one is 808 State. Got that from their Transmission Suite album cycle, and that one still looks good. Been wearing that one for a couple of years now. There's this one. This one says house music, sort of. You got Alan Parsons Project, iRobot. I used to have one of like the Alan Parsons logo. I think I wore it on some of like my early deadmau5 videos, except the logo on that one wiped off within like a month, and I couldn't wear it. It didn't look right to wear it anymore. So yeah, this one's still in pretty good condition though. This one, it's not a logo at all. It just says Switzerland. My parents got it when they were on vacation in Switzerland one time. I should have worn this for the yellow video. I don't know why I didn't, because they're from Switzerland. That's probably the most generic t-shirt I have. Next up, Neo-Ouija. This is Metamatic's record label. I don't know if it's still going, but I bought it when he just first started first restarted the label, I think, in 2016, sometime around then. 2017, maybe. Oh, it has his website at the back. I've never clicked on that link. Then there's this old classic, Pretty Lights. This is another t-shirt where, like, yeah, this one is starting to get a little worn out. But that's also kind of incredible because I got this one when I saw Pretty Lights live in like 2014. This shirt's almost like 10 years old and is still not that bad. It's probably the The logo is still very easily visible. You can tell exactly what it is. That's nice. I wore it for the very first video I ever made on this channel. Over here, we got this Orbital t-shirt. This was the first Orbital t-shirt that I got. I think this one is starting to go out of commission. I think it's got a hole in it or something. And this logo is starting to wear off a little bit with having been washed a lot. But yeah, that's the single for their, this was the cover for their single New France, and my dad found it somewhere, like I think secondhand possibly. It used to have tour dates on the back as well, and it does not anymore. Next up, here's some newer ones. This is one of my newest ones. It's the Brian Eno Another Green World cover. This is really freaking cool. Literally just got this one to my dad and my brother for Christmas presents and stuff. And they got me two others as well that I sent links to. There's this one for the Aphex Twin logo, Cybro era, I think. This is brand new. I've worn it for, I think, one video, maybe. We got this one for Flying Lotus. That's also brand new. Got it at the same time as those other two. I guess this one's not very new, but this is my third Orbital t-shirt that I got. This one I got from the Monsters Exist tour, the one time I saw them live, as mentioned earlier in this video. And this is the back that shows like the place and the dates that I saw them, which is pretty awesome. And since that was my third Orbital t-shirt, here's my second one. This one, that's got the Wonky logo on it, nothing on the back. Yeah, so 3 Orbital t-shirts. And next, here's one of my favorites. Here's the Avalanche's Wildflower. There we go. Yeah, it's one of the only white t-shirts I have. Most of them are black. The other white t-shirt I have is this one. This one with the Mike the Snare logo. I got one of his charity things, so that's one that I have. And then there's just a couple more left. These are from a couple of years ago. This one is my Square Pusher t-shirt. This one says Square Pusher on the back of it too. That's cool. It's from the Be Up Hello album cycle. Even though I wasn't really crazy about that album, it is a cool design, and I'm more than happy to get a Square Pusher related t-shirt. Here's one of my favorites. Music for Real Airports, Black Dog. That one's great because it's like the most niche reference of like any t-shirt I own. I hold this one quite close to me. It's one of my favorites. Next up, we got the Chemical Brothers. That's not that new, but relatively new. That doesn't have anything on the back, but that's something cool. Oh, I like how it's the Chemical Brothers on the front, and then you can kind of see the logo on the tag too. And next up, we got Magic One No Tricks Point Never. This is another one of my biggest favorite t-shirts to wear, and this is the back of it. That's pretty cool too, isn't it? Next, there's this one, the Kraftwerk t-shirt. From when I saw them live a couple of months ago, like this past summer. This one's cool. It also has the tour dates for on the back here. And then only 2 left here. We got this one for the Future Sound of London. This one I bought off their Bandcamp page, and I had to buy it because it sold out in like one day. Like the second it was announced. I had to get it that day because at any time FSOL announced merch, it sells out like immediately after they announce it. So I'm glad I got that one. And the last one that I have, technically not a t-shirt, but it's the only long sleeve one I have. This is False Noise, the Floral Strobe promotion thing. Upscale was like doing a one-off merch thing. And they had a little one, I think, of the actual Upscale logo, but it had already sold out by that point. And this also has a really cool design on the back, too. Check that out. I don't wear this one very often because I prefer short sleeve t-shirts, But this is a nice one. I guess in the winter. I've worn this one a couple of times. So yeah, that's my t-shirt collection. Oh yeah, and of course, the Spectrum Pulse t-shirt. Can't forget that. I'm wearing that one. I got it from his merch site. So you can check that out on his site too. And as for my top 3 t-shirts that I own, because someone asked that, I'm gonna say my number 3 would be the Another Green World one. My number 2 is probably the Magic One Tricks Point Never one. And my favorite one is Music for Real Airports, this one. Because, again, that's the most niche reference of any t-shirt that I have. If I'm wearing it at like a family gathering, and people ask, what does Music for Real Airports mean? That means I have to both explain to them who the Black Dog are and who Brian Eno is, and the reference that spurred that on in the first place. It's a nice discussion starter, and I don't have a lot of those kinds of discussion starters, I guess, in my t-shirts. It's just like, this is the logo of a band I like, and that's it. And yeah, that's going to be everything for this video. This was more than a little exhausting to put together, but thank you to everyone who submitted their questions, and sorry to all the people I skipped over, and of course, thank you again for 15,000 subscribers. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.